Hello, whiskey lovers. Today I thought we'd talk about the process of making whiskey, the water of life, as the Scots call it. The first step in the process of making whiskey is getting the highest quality barley, or grain if that's your fancy, or looking to make a blend, but I'm a Scotch lover, so I'm going to go with the barley. So you take the barley and you steep it in water, pretty much like you would with tea, and then you spread it all out all over the malting floor to allow it to germinate. Periodically, it's important to turn the malt over to prevent the buildup of heat. Traditionally, this was done with wooden shovels in a malt barn adjacent to the kiln. Now, it's during this process that the enzymes are activated that will eventually convert the starch into sugar during the next stage of the whiskey making process. So, after a week, give or take, of germination of the barley, the barley is now known as green malt and is transferred into the kiln for drying. This terminates germination. And it's important to remember to keep the temperature below 70 degrees Celsius to prevent the enzymes from being destroyed. It is during this drying process that you may add peat to the fire within the kiln to impart the smoky flavour that is expected in a Scotch. The second stage of processing is the mashing. The dried malt is ground into a coarse flour and mixed with hot water in a mash urn. The water is added in 3 stages, getting hotter each time, starting around about 67 degrees Celsius till it's near boiling at the final stage. The mash is stirred, helping to convert those starches into sugar, and the resulting sweet sugary liquid is now known as wort. The draft, that is the spent grains from this process, are now used as cattle feed. We move on to the third stage of the process, fermentation. The wort is cooled to a 20 degrees Celsius and then pumped into washback and yeast is added, and the miracle of fermentation begins. The yeast feeds on the sugar and produces the alcohol and congees, a compound that contribute to the flavour of the whiskey. Carbon dioxide is also formed, evident by the froth, and you might have to keep cutting the head to prevent overflow. Formation takes about 2 days, and then it starts to settle, and the ABV at this stage is around 6 to 8%. Now it's time for the distillation, stage 4. The shape of the pot still apparently contributes to the character of the whiskey, and distillers will maintain the stills in the exact same way for years, sometimes centuries. I'm sure we've all seen the stereotypical mad scientist chemistry shit, and this is essentially how still works. The still is heated just before boiling. The alcohol and congees vaporize, pass over the neck of the still into a large copper coil that's immersed in cold water, and this is known as a worm or condenser. The leftover yeast and residue is known as pot ale and is also used as cattle feed. The alcohol distilled is called a low wine and sits at about 20% ABV, and then is returned to the still for a second round. The more volatile compounds, known as the foreshots, are distilled first and channeled off. The heart of the run, the pure cut, are collected into the spirit receiver. The ABV now sits around about 68%. The stillmen take the newly distilled colourless fiery liquid and fill it into the oak casks, which may be aged or have been previously used to house rum, whiskey, sherry, bourbon, etc. And it is in these casks that the whiskey will go under maturation. By most country laws, whiskey must be matured for a minimum of 3 years, but a lot of distilleries will keep maturing it for 5, 8, 10, 12, 21, and beyond years. It is during the maturation process that whiskey will become smooth, and it will absorb the flavour and colour from the casks. A maximum of 2% of the whiskey is allowed to be evaporated each year from the cask, basically to prevent the cask from exploding. After the whiskey is matured, the blenders work their magic, and then the whiskey is bottled. Once the whiskey is in the bottle, maturation stops. So there you have it. How to create the water of life. So until next week, Sante.